Good people of the Grove, here we are again. It's been a minute since we've done a growth group video, but bear with me. We are here now and in Exodus chapter 12 for our growth groups. Man, what a rich chapter this is. I can tell you right now, there's no way I could go through all of the significance of this chapter in regards to not just how it applies to the Jewish people, more importantly, how it applies to us as followers of Jesus. Jesus did some really significant things with this passage and the details here as he applied it to himself at the Last Supper. And there's some certain resources that I'll attach to this that will help you. But man, it's rich, it's textured, it's layered. And what I'm going to talk about is just a scratching of the surface. But let's dig in, right? Here we are, growth groups, right? We're asking three questions. What does this say about God? What does this reveal about me? And then if all these things are true, which of course they are, what must I do? Again, we are in Exodus chapter 12, and we saved this one on purpose because it is the most important and the most severe of all the plagues on Egypt. It is the plague of the firstborn, right? And so if you recall, God is waging war against the pantheon of gods of Egypt. And it is, he continues that here in the plague of the firstborn. The goddess Isis was supposed to be the goddess that protected the children. And of course, we know through this that God will defeat even that God and in this most severe way. Now, I'll warn you, this is a tough passage. My 8-year-old son had a hard time with this one, and I would imagine many of us will as well. Like, why is God punishing all of the people of Israel for the sake of Pharaoh's sin? Well, there's no easy answer to that, but I would say this, that Pharaoh is a representative of all those in Egypt, and we'll get to this in a moment about what this says about us. We are deserving of this type of punishment because of our own personal sin, and that really is a giveaway to what does this say about us. But let's dig in. What does this say about God? Again, these are just things that I've come up with my personal time with the Lord, and I hope and pray that you have come up with different, even better ones than I have. First and foremost, if you'll notice, God resets time with this Passover. It should be of note that this is now the new year for the Jewish people. This is something new that's happening, and it is a marker for them and for us to understand there's something new here. God is resetting time. It is established, and he is establishing himself as the God of all time, and therefore sovereign and Lord over all. You'll notice that in verse 2, he says, this is a new thing. This is now a new year for you. You are to reset your calendar based on this time and these events that are happening. God is sovereign, and certainly he is sovereign as he ties in all these things with Jesus, and as Jesus applies all these things to himself as he institutes the Lord's Supper during Passover, if you'll remember. The second thing that I think is important for us to understand is that in verse 42, God keeps watch over his people. And I don't know what that does for you, but I need to be reminded that he's watching, that he is making sure not just that we do the right or wrong things, that's secondary. I think more importantly, he's watching in care, like a father would go in and check on his children at night to make sure that they're okay. God is a watchman over our souls. I need to hear that on a regular basis, that God cares about my soul so much that he's keeping watch over me. And then finally, the last thing that I'd say this reminds me of about God is that he has a specific plan for redemption. Okay, if you think about this, he could have kept the Israelites from the plague of the firstborn in all kinds of ways, but he does it in a practical way for the Israelites so that they might be able to keep this year after year, generation after generation. And if you can't keep it, you've got provisions with your neighbor. I loved that about God. But he has a specific plan for redemption. It's with hyssop. It's with the blood of a lamb. It's with the door frame, okay? It's with individual families and with the whole community. It's with it's through the curse of the firstborn, which should help us understand that God himself is taking the curse of the firstborn through a specific plan of redemption. That specific plan of redemption of the firstborn, he says, is our Passover lamb. And so there's all these tie-ins to Jesus that says, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5:7, Jesus is our Passover lamb. He is not just the firstborn that is taking the curse. He is also the true and better lamb that is sacrificed, and the blood covering his people. We are covered. Our forgiveness is purchased by the blood of another. It has been that way since Genesis 3. When Adam and Eve fell, they covered themselves, and that was not good enough. It took the blood of animals to cover their sin, and so God killed animals, covered them with loincloths. That was a picture to the Passover lamb, and of course the Passover lamb is a foreshadowing to the true and better Passover lamb of Jesus. I mean, his plan of redemption is beautiful, and it is from Genesis to Revelation, and it is very specific. Well, that's what it says about God, or at least the three things that I have found. Here's what it says about us. I've already said some of this, but I want to reiterate it. I want you to understand, we deserve the plague of the firstborn. We are as Gentiles, we are the Egyptians. We have made many false gods before us. We have worshiped them. If you don't know how you've worshiped false gods, it may not be the goddess of Isis or Omri or all these Ra or all the rest. Maybe that's far from us. But the God of comfort, the God of control, the God of power, the God of acceptance and approval, and these things we serve on a regular basis. It is, as John Calvin has said long ago, our heart is a factory of idols and false gods, and we are prone to wander and worship them on a regular basis. We deserve, our sins have racked up the death of the firstborn, and we deserve it. So no longer can we look at them and go, well, God's just not just in his punishment here. He is just. Those people, the people of Egypt, just as much as us, we deserve to die. And it took the specific purpose and plan of redemption that God would send his own son, the Passover lamb, the perfect lamb, to shed his blood on behalf of sinners. If we would look upon him and believe, then we would be spared of the destroyer, as God says in Exodus 12. Man, we deserve this, and God has been merciful to us. God makes special provisions for his people. If you'll notice that it is a specific lamb, it is a spotless lamb. But if your family is not big enough, he says, go to your nearest neighbor, partake there in the appropriate lamb, and take the blood upon your house. Like, even if you're insignificant in the eyes of being able to have your own lamb for this particular feast, go to your neighbor. What a beautiful special provision by God. And this special provision is for all of Israel. The third thing that it reveals about us, not only that God makes special provisions for us, but also our obedience matters. Like, I don't know about you, but when you read through this, can you imagine having been given this information for the first time? I would imagine it was disorienting. It was so strange. Like, I'm going to take a lamb, I'm going to take hyssop, I'm going to paint my door frame with blood, and then what? An angel of death is going to visit, and he's going to pass over us. Man, this is totally strange. You know what? You could have easily said, man, this is too kooky for me. I'm just not in it. But man, our obedience matters whether we fully understand why we're being obedient or not. What matters is who said what we should do and if we're going to trust him. If you'll notice, there are some that were put out of Israel, or at least if you ate leavened bread over these 7 days, you were to be put out of Israel. If you were put out of Israel in that day, you were going to be counted amongst the Egyptians, and your firstborn was going to die. Either way, and it doesn't say, you'll notice, the firstborn children. If you were a firstborn adult, I would imagine you also would have died. In every house of Egypt, whether they had children or not, if you were the firstborn, you were going to die no matter how old you were. And so could you imagine the dire consequences of disobedience here? And I think it's a reminder for us. Our obedience matters, y'all. It matters. I pray we take our obedience seriously. And speaking of that, what must we do as a result of all this? Well, number one, and I think this is really fitting here. Look, we need to understand family discipleship matters. Generational discipleship, the reason why we don't have childcare for neighborhood groups for most of them is because generational discipleship matters. We are to teach these things to our children and to the generations to come. Basically, I think for us, out of verse 26, we need to remember the call here. And when your children say to you, "What do you mean by all of this?" we should be living in a distinct and particular way that even our children will go, "Why do we live like this, Dad, Mom?" And if they're not, let's ask the question for them. You may be wondering why you live like this. If you're a kid, ask your parents, why do we go to church? Why do we do Lord's Supper? Why are we getting baptized? Why do we do Easter and Good Friday? What is all this? May we have an answer. We must disciple our kids with God's redemptive story at the heart of any story we're telling them. That's the first thing that I think we must do. Number two, we must take personal responsibility for redemption. We must take personal responsibility for our own salvation. Our kids, you, teen growth group, if you're in this and you're watching this and you're listening to this and you're a teen, you will not be saved by the faith of your family. There will come a point where you're going to have to put the hyssop and the blood on your own home for the sake of the community and the congregation around you. This is a personal thing, and it has communal consequences. You must take responsibility for your own salvation and your own walk, just as the Israelites did. And then finally, note this. At the end of the story, the Israelites had to get up quickly with haste and go. When the blood of the Lamb is applied to your home and to your heart, you can expect your life to get very inconvenient, and you can expect your home to change. You can't find a home anymore in Egypt. You've got to journey with the Lord into the desert for a longer time than you want in order for Him to provide for you, to take away some things from you that don't belong to Him anymore, to prepare a way for Himself to be Lord of your life over the long haul. Prepare for change. If you're trying to live the same life that you lived before you knew Jesus, you can prepare for a lot of difficulty. Instead, you got to get out of Egypt, and you've got to follow Jesus into the desert, and you've got to follow Him, obeying Him, so that when He is ready to give you the home that He wants to give you, sanctified and new and right and beautiful, the one that He's prepared, not just in heaven, but also here on the earth, that you're ready for that. I pray that we are a people that don't try to find our home in Egypt, but do find our home with Jesus, even if it means denying the comforts of all that we once had and finding our ultimate hope and rest in Him. Well, this message and this video has gone long enough. I pray that it's helpful. I pray that this Exodus 12 has been a hope for you, and I pray that you would continue to dig in. Love you, and I'll see you soon.